At the Government Operations Committee, we're looking at Indigenous procurement and planning some further study on it. Mr. Bernard, you've told us a story about growing up on reserve, starting a successful business that employs Indigenous people and investing back in your community. Based on what we know from your testimony, that seems precisely like the kind of outcomes that Indigenous procurement policies are meant to support. But we also know now clearly that there are instances of abuse as well. Tiny companies that become qualified as Indigenous but who subcontract the actual work to non-Indigenous firms and do not provide benefit back to Indigenous communities. You were quoted in the Globe and Mail saying that you tried for years to advise the government on how it could refine its Indigenous set-aside contracting policies. Sir, what is your advice? How can the current problems, the use of the Dalian model, for instance, be fixed to achieve the kind of outcomes that the program is supposed to aim for?
Well, it's actually on record. In 2006, I sat in front of a Senate committee on Aboriginal procurement. And back in 2006, I warned of the potential abuse of joint ventures. And to this day, 18 years later, we are seeing the results of that. Basically, I was using terms like Aboriginal companies need to learn how to walk before they run. Yet, amazingly, Don Carmen's been in business 28 years, and we find ourselves up against Aboriginal firms that were running, they just got into business and are running multi-million-dollar contracts. I guess what I'm trying to say is being an Aboriginal is not a skill. But yet in the Aboriginal procurement with joint ventures, it's almost like if you're Aboriginal, all of a sudden, that's the quality you're bringing to the joint venture. And we just don't agree with that. We feel that, I mean, obviously you have to start somewhere. So there should be small. But we believe the Aboriginal side of a joint venture, it should progress. They shouldn't be going after a $100 million contract when they were riding an ice cream truck the week before. And so this is my if you go back to the 2006 testimony, which is on record and on the Senate committees, in there I actually give 3 ways that I think that should be addressed. And the first one is most importantly, it's a joint venture. That's where there's really a lot of room for abuse. Unfortunately, there's no motivation for Aboriginal companies to grow, because if you can become a joint venture and you don't have to do nothing, you don't even have to you don't even need a staff or admin staff, because your joint venture partner has all that. So.
Earlier testimony, because I suspect you could talk for a long time on this, and we'll have to maybe have you back. But that seems exactly what happened with Dalian and Carotics, right? Carotics is a larger non-Indigenous company. Dalian is an Indigenous company with 2 people that receives contracts and subcontracts. They're in joint venture, which fulfills a procurement requirement. Also on the issue of subcontractors, you mentioned that your company has subcontractors. There's supposed to be a requirement for Indigenous subcontractors as part of Indigenous procurement, but there seems to be no tracking or enforcement of that whatsoever. What is your experience with Indigenous subcontractors, and is the government asking you questions about that? Are you providing data on that at all?
No, and let's face it, there's not enough Indigenous people to meet some of these contracts. So calling yourself an Aboriginal company or Indigenous company, I don't, just because I own 100% and I'm status Indian, I don't believe that that's what I should be Aboriginal benefits. It's not what we do. When people ask me, well, you're an Aboriginal company, what does that mean? Do you stand on one leg and, no, we do business just like everybody else. And me calling myself an Aboriginal company, it's what we do. And not just in hiring Indigenous people, but in the sponsoring and the supporting and the spinning off other Aboriginals, or as I explained with my community. That to me is the solution. But I'm sorry, but if you're just going to hire Aboriginal people and you think you're going to get 50 Aboriginal people on a 150-person project, that's just not going to happen in this field.